Tonight, Leaders Call. World leaders flock to UN General Assembly to debate its future on wide-ranging issues and ongoing humanitarian catastrophes. Pacific Might. China fires ICBM into Pacific Ocean in first such public test in decades as regional tensions flare. Catastrophic Helene. Storms set to intensify and cause catastrophic damage across Florida as southeastern U.S. braces for surge of flood, rains and high wind. And Little Distress. A young whale wedged under a wharf swims free after being rescued by conservationists and local residents. All that and more as World News Tonight starts right now.
This is Derana World News Tonight.
A very good evening to you and thank you for joining us on World News Tonight, where we bring you the latest updates from across the globe. I'm Nadi Balasurya. We have many key stories to get you up to date on, and we begin with the latest events unfolding in the United Nations. In New York, world leaders have gathered for this year's UN General Assembly seeking to address global challenges. Conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine are likely to top the agenda.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres denounced on Tuesday local time a growing number of governments and other groups who feel they are entitled to get out of jail free card, citing wars in Ukraine, the Gaza Strip and Sudan. He called the conflict in Ukraine a war spreading with no signs of letting up, with civilians paying the price, and also reaffirmed his condemnation of abhorrent acts of terror committed by Hamas.
The level of impunity in the world is politically indefensible and morally intolerable. They can trample international law. They can violate the United Nations Charter. They can turn a blind eye to international human rights conventions or the decisions of international courts.
World leaders raised concerns on the major spike in violence in Lebanon. Maldives President Mohamed Muizzu condemned Israeli acts of terrorism, saying those are interpreted as nothing but brutal attacks. Jordan's King Abdullah II called on the global community to address the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza, where more than 40,000 Palestinians have been killed. While there was a majority of voices raising concerns over the need to address international conflicts, no specific solutions were suggested. Speeches on Israel and Palestine, a main area of concern, will be held on Thursday local time.
A Hong Kong court is due to sentence two former editors who have been found guilty of sedition after publishing articles about a national security crackdown in the city under China, a ruling that has prompted an international outcry.
In a landmark case about media freedom, Chung Poo-ken and Patrick Lam of the now-defunct Stand News media outlet were convicted last month, the first time journalists have been found guilty of sedition since the handover of Hong Kong from Britain to China in 1997. Chung, 55, and Lam, 36, had pleaded not guilty. Stand News, once Hong Kong's leading online media outlet, was known for its hard-hitting reports about the city's 2019 pro-democracy protests and later the national security crackdown. Under Hong Kong law, they could be jailed for up to 2 years. Rights groups have condemned the verdict, with reporters being borders, calling on Hong Kong to stop its nefarious campaign against press freedom. In a written statement, District Court Judge Kwok Wai Kin said that Stand News had become a danger to national security. Their newspaper's editorial line supported Hong Kong local autonomy. Both journalists were charged under a colonial-era sedition law, which until recently had been rarely used by prosecutors, rather than the controversial national security law. They are due to be sentenced later on in September.
A Japanese warship sailed through the Taiwan Strait between Taiwan and China for the first time. The JS Sazanami, a naval destroyer, passed through the strait from north to south yesterday, accompanied by ships from Australia and New Zealand.
The vessel was on its way to take part in military exercises in the South China Sea, Japanese ministers were quoted as saying. This would be a significant move by Japan, which is thought to have avoided sailing its ships through the strait in order not to upset China, which claims self-governed Taiwan and the strait. Neither Japan, Taiwan or China has commented officially on the passage. Chinese state newspaper Global Times, citing an unnamed source, said the Chinese military conducted tracking and monitoring throughout the vessel's entire course had the situation under control. There has been an increase in patrols by the US and its allies to assert their freedom of navigation in the 180-kilometer Taiwan Strait. Both the US and Taiwan say it is a key shipping and trade route through which about half of the global container fleet passes and is part of international waters and is open to all naval vessels. Beijing, which claims sovereignty and jurisdiction over the strait, disagrees. For decades, the US Pacific Fleet was the only foreign navy that regularly transited the strait, but recently it was joined by Canada and Australia, Britain and France.
China test-launched an intercontinental ballistic missile, firing it into the Pacific Ocean in its first such exercise in decades. However, experts warn that the latest test is likely to raise the temperature in the region as it was conducted from the island of Hainan rather than from an inland launching site.
On Wednesday morning in China, residents woke up to a rare announcement on state television that an intercontinental ballistic missile had been fired into the Pacific Ocean. Details were revealed by Chinese authorities after the test launch, without specifying whether it was launched from a submarine or on land. China's neighbours, Japan, said they had not been given any notice, and that Beijing's military build-up, as well as their lack of transparency, were a serious concern. Similar statements were also given by Australia and New Zealand. This type of intercontinental ballistic missile is one of the most powerful weapons in the world and can transport nuclear warheads. China hasn't carried out such a test since the 1980s. Beijing and Washington are battling for influence in the Pacific. This test launch could put the question of controlling weapons back on the table. It's a sensitive topic for many countries in the Pacific because of the track record of nuclear weapons testing in the region.
Bringing you updates on the papal visit, Pope Francis arrived in Luxembourg this morning for a brief day visit to one of Europe's smallest countries ahead of a weekend trip to Belgium. There, he will highlight the needs of migrants and meet with a group of survivors of abuse by Catholic clergy.
The Luxembourg and Belgium tour is a rare European visit for Pope Francis, who prefers going to places never visited by a pope or where Catholics are a small minority. It comes less than 2 weeks after Pope Francis returned from a demanding 12-day 4-country tour across Southeast Asia and Oceania. The 87-year-old pontiff landed at Luxembourg's Findel International Airport on a chartered ITA Airways flight carrying also his entourage and accompanying reporters. The Pope will spend the day in the country before heading on in the evening to Brussels, the Belgian capital. Pope Francis will hold private meetings with Luxembourg's Grand Duke Henry, the monarch, and the Prime Minister Luc Frieden before giving a speech to the country's political authorities. He will also hold a meeting with local Catholics at Luxembourg City's Notre Dame Cathedral.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. On the road to the White House now, Vice President Kamala Harris said that she would offer tax credits to domestic manufacturers and invest in sectors that will define the next century. She detailed her economic plan to boost the U.S. middle class, speaking at the Economic Club of Pittsburgh in the battleground state of Pennsylvania.
Harris also promised new investments in industries like biomanufacturing, aerospace, artificial intelligence and clean energy. Harris's speech, which lasted just under 40 minutes, did not detail how these policies would work. She highlighted her upbringing by her single mother, in contrast with Trump, the wealthy son of a New York real estate developer. The vice president pledged that building a strong middle class would be the defining goal of her presidency, adding that she sees the election as a moment of choice between two fundamentally different visions of the US economy, held by her and her Republican opponent Donald Trump. The Vice President and Trump are focusing their campaign messaging on the economy, which Reuters Ipsos polling shows is voters' top concern as the election approaches. Harris said that Trump is only interested in making life better for himself and people like himself, the wealthiest of Americans. She said she was committed to working with the private sector and entrepreneurs to help grow the middle class. She told the audience that she's a capitalist who believes in free and fair markets and described her policies as pragmatic rather than rooted in ideology. Harris in recent months has blunted Trump's advantage on the economy with a Reuters Ipsos poll published recently showing the Republican candidate with a marginal advantage of 2 percentage points on the economy, unemployment and jobs, down from an 11-point lead in late July.
Still in the US, Hurricane Helene is now forecast to reach catastrophic Category 4 strength by the time it makes landfall in Florida on Thursday, with the storm surge potentially climbing to 20 feet. With power outages expected throughout the state, Georgia and North Carolina each have declared a state of emergency.
After hammering Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula as a tropical storm, flooding streets and taking down trees in Cancun, Helene is now a hurricane, gaining strength on a collision course with Florida. Interstate 4 packed with vehicles. Tallahassee, Florida's capital city of more than 200,000 people, directly in the path. Down the coast, ambulances transferring patients out of low-lying Pasadena Hospital in St. Petersburg. And extreme measures at Tampa General Hospital, too. Helene expected to knock out power across the state. Officials say 18,000 linemen are already staged in high-risk areas and more are on the way.
Vladimir Putin warned the West that Russia could use nuclear weapons if it is struck with conventional missiles, and that Moscow would consider any assault on it supported by a nuclear power to be a joint attack.
The updated version of the document proposes that aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear weapon state, but with the participation or support of a nuclear weapon state, should be regarded as a joint attack on the Russian Federation. The conditions for Russia's transition to the use of nuclear weapons are also clearly defined. We will consider such a possibility as soon as we receive reliable information about a massive launch of aerospace attack means and their crossing of our state border, meaning strategic or tactical aircraft, cruise missiles, drones, hypersonic missiles, and other aircraft.
Беспилотники, гиперзвуковые и другие летательные аппараты. Являем за собой право.
We reserve the right to use nuclear weapons in the event of aggression against Russia and Belarus as a member of the Union state. All these issues have been agreed upon with the Belarusian side and with the president of Belarus. This includes cases when the enemy, using conventional weapons, poses a critical threat to our sovereignty.
Meanwhile, in Israel, frontline workers are taking every precaution to prepare against what they predict could be an all-out war with Hezbollah, as it is targeting northern Israel with rockets fired from southern Lebanon. The recent measure being an Israeli hospital going underground in an effort to remain safe.
Deep underground, on level -3 of this vast parking lot, car lanes now transformed into hospital corridors and parking spaces into subterranean medical wards. With Israel's war with Hezbollah escalating, most of Haifa's Rambam hospital has been relocated down below into its underground parking lot. Now 27 feet down, this, the largest trauma center in northern Israel, is now shielded from conventional biological and chemical warfare. Up on ground level, wards which normally operate in more peaceful times are now empty. Back underground and with a wider war looming, the medical director and his team are preparing for a worst-case scenario. A 60-day war, he says, in which missiles could be striking Israel every 4 minutes. Amid that threat, Israeli soldiers are constructing more beds to increase the hospital's capacity. For now, there are relatively few casualties here from the war. But with Israel promising a ground invasion into southern Lebanon, years of contingency planning by medical staff here could soon kick into gear.
Over in Germany, Volkswagen employees continue to protest over pay cuts and potential plant closures. The automobile giant is considering closing some factories for the first time in its 87-year history as a part of its cost-cutting strategy. Earlier this month, more than 16,000 gathered workers began the meeting by whistling and shouting, "We are Volkswagen, you are not," after the company announced its cost-cutting strategies.
Trade unions and Volkswagen company executives kick off landmark pay talks Wednesday. It's likely to decide how aggressively Europe's biggest automaker pursues layoffs and possible factory closures in Germany. Tensions are running high as VW has threatened to close plants in the country for the first time. That's put it at odds with the key IG Metall union, which has vowed to fight any such moves. The union must also negotiate new labour deals for the core VW brand's 130,000 workers in Germany. Earlier this month, the automaker ended agreements that had safeguarded employment at 6 of its plants there since the mid-90s. VW argues high energy and labour costs in Germany make it harder to compete with European peers. It's also warned Chinese rivals want to grab a big chunk of the region's electric vehicle market. The VW brand's personnel chief said the division must cut costs to stay competitive. He called the firm's situation serious and said labour and management must work together on restructuring. Other German automakers feel the pain too. BMW and Mercedes-Benz both cut their profit forecasts in recent weeks due to weak demand in China.
Telegram founder and chief executive Pavel Durov said on Monday that the messaging platform had removed more problematic content weeks after his arrest in France on charges of failing to act against criminals using the app. Durov told the 13 million subscribers of his personal messaging channel that Telegram's search feature has been abused by people who violated the terms of service to sell illegal goods.
1 month after being arrested by French authorities, Telegram founder Pavel Durov agrees to cooperate and hand over information of people who use the platform for criminal purposes. Durov was charged with failing to curb extremist and terrorist contact on Telegram.
To further deter criminals from abusing Telegram search, we have updated our terms of service and privacy policy, ensuring they are consistent across the world. We've made it clear that the IP addresses and phone numbers of those who violate our rules can be disclosed to relevant authorities in response to valid legal requests.
An avowed free speech advocate, Durov initially criticized his arrest. He has long resisted attempts to take down content on Telegram and has previously seen it banned in Iran and in his native Russia, where it was later unbanned rather than hand over users' details. Telegram is often erroneously believed to be an end-to-end encrypted platform, but this is not the default setting for private messages and not at all for chat groups. A holder of a French passport among 3 other nationalities, Durov was arrested on August 24th upon arriving at Le Bourget airport on a private plane. It remains to be seen if his climb down will result in the charges against him being dropped.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. Welcome back. And finally tonight, an endangered whale is swimming freely after locals stepped in to help. It took a rescue crew pulling out several of the wharf's posts in order to free the whale. The wharf had to be partially dismantled using an excavator.
An endangered whale is swimming freely after locals stepped in to help. Authorities were alerted when people saw a whale in distress underneath a wharf in New Zealand. Somehow, a juvenile pygmy blue whale wedged itself underneath a privately owned pier. Marine life experts estimate the whale was between 45 and 50 feet long. They knew time was one of the most important factors in saving this whale's life, so multiple organizations worked quickly to try to lead the whale out. Eventually, it took a rescue crew pulling out several of the wharf's posts in order to free the whale. The wharf had to be partially dismantled using an excavator. Once freed from the wharf, Boats were positioned to block the whale from swimming towards the shore, and a barge helped guide the whale out to sea. The New Zealand Department of Conservation says the pygmy blue whale was last seen swimming into deeper water.
And that brings us to the end of today's bulletin. We will see you again tomorrow with the latest happenings across the globe. Stay tuned as Sanvi Mudan Nayaka will join you next with the Nightly Business Report. Thank you for watching and have a good night.